Hey, how is everybody? I've been thinking a lot recently about freeze and override and how they're the same coin, two different sides of the same coin. And I tend to think a lot about this in regards to birth and the postpartum time and in regards to sex, because those are two of the realms where I work and I work with people, although it's true in lots and lots of aspects of life. But for postpartum parents, postpartum parents and people who have just gone through birth, this can be especially important because a lot of people end up in freeze during birth and in the postpartum time. And that happens for a couple of different reasons. One is that birth in the US right now is pretty highly medicalized. Most people are birthing in the hospital. And when you birth in the hospital, you have a much higher chance of having interventions in the birth. So that might be getting induced with Pitocin. It might mean getting an epidural. It might mean surgical birth. It might mean a C-section. And also, our boundaries tend to be ruptured pretty our boundaries can be ruptured pretty significantly during the birthing process, especially in a medicalized situation in the hospital. That's because the doctors and the nurses in labor and delivery are, they have a lot that they're doing. There's a lot that's happening. There are a lot of people who are birthing at any given time in the bigger cities and bigger hospitals. And so part of it is just schedule and getting people moved along. Two is that people are afraid of birth. There's like this whole thing of wanting to do less harm, and somehow in birth that has gotten turned into more intervention and more surgical birth as opposed to just letting birth happen in its natural flow state. So long way to say that a lot of people end up on the backside of birth in this fourth trimester in freeze. And that might look or feel like exhaustion or lethargy, disorientation and confusion, and it might be all the way to depression and not wanting or not being able to get out of bed and not caring and having a really hard time connecting with your baby. Freeze in this state can also mean that, especially like with an epidural or a C-section, that part of your body, part of your system is in freeze or not really connecting well in. And so you get to the other side and you're like, I just don't quite feel like my body's mine, or it's not working. I just don't have that same connection. And one thing about freeze is that it's really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable because we don't necessarily have a map for it, because we don't talk about what it actually is. We name it all kinds of other things. And it's also very uncomfortable because in the postpartum time, most of us end up being really isolated. Especially right now, right, with COVID, freaking everybody is isolated. But even before coronavirus, postpartum families, unless there's a really, really proactive plan to make sure that you are supported, people are coming into your space and they are providing you food and they are looking you in the eyes and they are witnessing you and they are celebrating you for this rite of passage that you are going through, and they're there to catch you on the other side. Unless there's proactive planning, or you just have friends who already know all of that and already in that world, there's a high chance that you're actually sitting at home. Maybe your partner has had to go back to work and you're actually literally all alone with baby. It's another reason some of us end up in freeze. We've just gone through this really big deal and now we're all alone. We don't know what's up and what's down. So when we end up in freeze like that, we tend to go into override, which makes sense, right? Because shit still has to get done. It's uncomfortable to be in the freeze. And so we override it, and we do this all the time. If you want to look at maybe a little smaller situation, think about having to go home to family over the holidays, right? And you're like, oh, I kind of shut down, but I'm just going to put a smile on my face and get through it, and it's going to be fine. That forced smile is a form of overriding what is actually happening in the system. So in postpartum time, this could look like, oh, I'm just going to get right back up into exercise, or I am going to get right back into work, or I am just going to make dinner, going to do all of the things that we're accustomed to doing as adult human beings in this world. When actually in the postpartum time, what you really, really need is to rest. Such profound, deep, long rest for your physical body, for your emotional body, for your hormones, all kinds of good reasons to rest and treat yourself with nutrition. So I just want to like put this out there as a thing to pay attention to and to be aware of, in that because getting into this postpartum time can be confusing anyway, because we've never done it before, or this is the first time with this particular baby in this particular situation. And so it can feel a little bit disorienting in itself, and especially if we're sort of pushing aside that freeze and we're going into override, or we have to because we're parenting other kids and nobody is there to take care of us. It's a recipe for depletion, for sure, and it's a recipe for ongoing perinatal mental health disorders. And so just being aware that it's there, watching and being there for your friends who are in postpartum time. So this is one thing that gets me all the time. Somebody sees a person out with their 2-week-old baby and they're at farmer's market and hiking around, or maybe they're at work. I work at farmer's market, so I see people there working with their brand new babies, and people say, "Oh my God, you're amazing. You are a superhero. Holy cow, you are just so impressive." And it drives me crazy, because what that person actually needs to be doing is going home and getting into bed and having somebody feed them food. Yeah, and so there's this social, you get a little social gold star when you override. But in the long term, the really important thing is to be tending to yourself, tending to your physiological needs. So just something to think about, something to pay attention about in yourself or your friends.